but I do believe we have a quorum, do we not? Okay, don't worry about that then. The first item of the agenda is you were given a series of minutes from previous meetings, which I would like to have any edits to or changes, and if not, a motion to approve. I think we can just do them all as one block, can we not? Yeah. Any comments or changes or additions or subtractions? Or okay.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Motion to approve. Seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye. Opposed? Okay. We have one person who is asked to make public comments this meeting. Will Minkoff. Are you here, Will? Good. Yes, please. Is there a place for him to stand? Yeah, over here. Okay. And remind me of the rules. It's 2 minutes. Okay. You have 2 minutes. But there's no trapdoor or anything. So.
Thank you, Governor. So my name is Will Minkoff. I'm the co-founder of Nashville Severe Weather. I've also spent a career as an emergency management consultant working for a Nashville company called Bold Planning for a long time. I know Mr. Vanderpool personally and professionally. It's, as you can imagine, a small world of professional emergency managers in Middle Tennessee. I'd like to just briefly share some of my thoughts about the winter storm. A number of different people have asked me, but I figure it can't hurt to get it on the record. Right. 44 hours went by from the time OEM discussed internally that this was a life-threatening event until they said those words publicly. And by then, we had been saying it for 3 days, but they didn't ask us. And by all recollection, they didn't really spend much time asking the Weather Service either. Public information that's been requested and shared about their comprehensive emergency management plan, their sheltering plan, emergency support function 8, which I won't waste my time explaining. Johnny can talk about it, was all lacking. My emails from my organization from a media capacity to OEM as a voice to this city, just asked for simple information about what can we share about sheltering. If somebody is out of power and they come to us and they say, I have no power, I have 3 kids, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do, what do we tell them? OEM's response in writing to us was, well, they can always call 911. Yeah, they can, but don't we have a sheltering plan? What's the plan in place? Well, we can work with our partners to open shelters as needed, and a few other platitudes from Joseph Pleasant that really didn't strike me as an organization that had it together and was ready for something like this. Emergency management doctrine, the emergency management accreditation program, all say that planning needs to be done ahead of events like this, and it's pretty clear that that didn't happen. Those 44 hours that went by, we had 63 people evaluated, 4 people just in those 44 hours, 4 different people transported to Vanderbilt. And by the end of the event, there were more than 50 kids treated for carbon monoxide sickness at Vanderbilt. Why didn't they have a shelter to go to? Why didn't they know where they could have gone? Why didn't they know what was waiting for them? Were there people who simply said, the shelters aren't for me, that's for somebody that doesn't have a home, that's for a homeless person? No. Hey, if you're the father of 3 kids and you don't know how you're going to stay warm tonight, by the way, it's going to be 5 degrees overnight or whatever, know that this place is here for you to help you solve that problem. We want to make sure you're taken care of. And OEM's response was, well, there will be homeless teams going around and targeting hotspots and trying to get people up off the street. But that wasn't the problem. The people that live on the street know that it was coming. They know that they can go to the rescue mission, or they can go room in the inn, or wherever it is. It was for the common person that OEM should have presented their narrative for. I'll submit the rest of my notes to the email address that you've made public. I encourage you to go through them, and they were all made contemporaneously as the situation unfolded, and I think OEM could have done a lot better. I'm not an expert in electricity. I can't say anything about NES. I was without power for, a week and a half or something like that. But I was prepared. I'm probably one of the more prepared people in the city, right? We've got generators and Starlink and all this stuff that we need to keep our enterprise up and running, but the average person didn't really have that, and I think it was a real opportunity wasted, and I hope that findings from this commission speak to the need for OEM to become a professional organization driven by a universal international standard, which exists and our neighbors use, the state uses, but OEM doesn't. I think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement, not only from leadership, but just from policies and procedures.
Good. Thank you very much. We're here today to take a first cut at a draft of an interim report. You obviously are expert on this subject, so if you would give those things in writing,
Yeah.
Either here or to that email address, something.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you all the time that you asked.
And I think it would be helpful in terms of putting meat on the next round of this and the next draft of it. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And man, there's just in the document, I share some stories that we heard from folks. Folks like to come and tell us their stories, and man, I think it was a lot worse than I think the problem with NES overshadowed the fact that this was a human crisis that went unaddressed. So, but yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I'll make sure I submit this.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's. This is kind of a working session to look at this draft. These things are always tricky when you try to have, drafts and a lot of people working on them and trying to get things together. I had, with all the various inputs that we had, drawn up a kind of a first draft of what I thought were the key points from my perspective that had come out of it all, and I thought we might go through those. This is an early draft. I mean, think of it as 0.9 or something. And so if there are things in here, what I'm trying to say is I'm not so much interested in people editing the language in the draft as I am to make sure that we have incorporated the thoughts of people who are on this commission and the things you learned during the course of it. I thought maybe one way to do that was I had in the discussion section, there were 4 or 5 or 6 sort of major topics. And maybe we could take those one at a time and just get your input on those areas and see whether I caught the sense of the commission, whether there's things that need to be added or subtracted or changed as a result of that. Does that make sense to all of you as an approach to go ahead? Okay. I gotta go find it here. Okay, if you go back to, it would be back here on page 14, which I labeled preliminary observations. The first one is one of the things that struck me in all of the presentations and reading the staff interviews was sort of how far out of the way people who were employees of Metro, employees of NES, and everyone had gone to try to make things work. There were clearly systemic issues in it, and they were made much less, in my opinion, much less severe than they might have been by the way that people were willing to kind of step out and do things. I tried to capture that in this Metro Nashville, and NES employees performed exceptionally well. But I'd be interested in your comments of, have we captured it here? What are we missing in this that needs to be added? What is wrong in your opinion about what was stated? If you don't answer, I'll call on somebody. So, Johnny? Or, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're sort of spot on. We heard a lot of testimony from the leadership, and I had some conversations with just people who were in those operational units. So I think this needs to be well documented. I think a lot of the people that work, and by the way, you're talking about when I woke up on Tuesday morning, it was 3 degrees at my house. And the first thing that came to my mind is, I'm glad I'm not outside pulling lines right now and cutting trees. And I know for a fact there were people outside, NES, Metro, a whole group of people who were out there working that morning. So I commend you. I think this is spot on. I think this is and I recognize that because we heard that from all our leaders who had testimony. So I just wanted to say I think this is a good section, and I feel like it's very valid to this interim report.
Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. I think generally, whether in this section and then how this section relates to the entirety of the document, I would absolutely concur, and I want to make sure that our Metro employees and NES employees do feel seen and appreciated. But I think there is a tension here between kind of individual commendation, right? People who had to step up and do extraordinary things in extraordinary times for lack of systems and process, right? And so I think I see that through here, kind of both things. But I really do want to make sure, and I find this to sometimes be a challenge in Metro, in an effort not to be unkind, rightly, to those folks who are doing really good, hard work. Maybe we are insufficiently critical of the systems and processes that did not support those individuals, right? They really had to extend themselves and step up commendably, but that is for lack of clarity, process, and so forth. So I would like to make sure that that is a through line in this, and that we balance it more to the side of, as always, constructive criticism, but making sure that we're going to have systems in place and recommended subsequent to this effort. Thank you.
Okay. I take your point absolutely, and in a way, I think if you went back to the beginning, the bottom line of all this was that there were systemic failures, and they were substantially mitigated by the willingness of employees to step up, and tried to capture that up here in this bottom line in the first paragraph. But the idea of perhaps extending it into this larger discussion, I think is probably a good suggestion. Who else has some comments on this? I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Chair. I kind of agree with both sets of comments that we just heard. I do think that it's important to highlight the work of our employees who did step up during this time. And I do agree with Vice Mayor, like they had to step up in essence because of gaps within some of our current systems. But, as we read through the report, like we also highlight those gaps. I do think that if the first preliminary thing that people read is praising the employees before it talks about maybe gaps in systems, I think that could give a appearance of maybe being somewhat, I don't want to use the term bias because I don't think it's that strong, but I think that could impact the way that people receive the report. I think flipping 2 and 1 may be a little bit more appropriate, and recommendation 2, and I know we'll get to it, so I don't want to get too far into it, but it's talking about how those agencies manage their operations. And I think to me, that's more of a logistical flow. If we talk about how the different departments work through their operations, then going into praising what the employees did, and then we're going into some of the shortfalls. I think to me that just makes a little bit more sense logistically, and I think it may be a little more well received by the public.
Yeah, I think as I got into trying to draft this, I was trying to cut a line between, on one hand, you want to honor and recognize extraordinary effort where it occurred, and at the same time, that's not me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
And at the same time, you don't want to come across as like being defensive and apologetic and praising yourself up here before these systemic issues were out there. I guess I still would argue, I'd be interested in the Commission's reviews about placing the employee stuff, perhaps with some modifications I'm willing to suggest as kind of a first thing going in. I kind of felt we owe that to the employees, but that's a call I think the Commission should probably make. I mean, other thoughts on that issue as to how pertinent that should be, Beth?
I would like to concur with the Councilwoman's some thoughts on this. I don't want it to look like to the public or to even the mayor that we're sugarcoating this. We're praising everybody, and then by the way, there's a few things we should look at. I think it's more important that we had a crisis and it was not handled the best. Now that doesn't mean, but I definitely think we need to praise the employees that came out when they were stuck in their homes, right? So I want to praise them, but I do think it should be kind of flipped as suggested, just so we appear legitimate, that we're honestly looking at this and we're looking at it with a critical eye.
All right. Other thoughts on that? Yeah, Mayor.
I do know we are on page 14, but I did want to sort of circle back as you made the connection there between page 2 and the executive summary. I think what a lot of us in government know is that some people will never read farther than the executive summary. And so, kind of from a bottom line perspective or sort of order of, I think to all the points made here, I think inverting that somewhat, maybe it is just the preamble alludes to the commendable response and the understanding, right, that the work that we're doing here is predicated on that knowledge. But I feel that we really should lead with that kind of process, systems, recommendations, shortcomings right off the top. Thank you.
Governor?
All right, yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's the way the table is set, it's a little hard for me to sort of keep track of everybody. So just this is a small group. Just go ahead and speak if you want to speak. Yeah,
Thank you, Governor. I have a few different things, and maybe we could come back to this once other folks have time to speak as well. But I concur with the Vice Mayor putting some clearer and direct recommendations into the executive summary would be helpful. I mean, I think we referenced some of those, but you really do have to get back into page 14 to start kind of really seeing what the headline is. And I want to really, maybe this is more of a process question for next steps, but I think that as we've talked through this, NDOT performed, I want to repeat that NDOT performed exceptionally well. I think the coordination of the departments is referenced in this, but needs to be evaluated even deeper about the coordination of the departments and what, we reference how it could have been better. I would like to see maybe some more detail in specifically what coordination would have looked like. We mentioned the virtual meetings and those being, potentially not the most effective, but I'd like us to really kind of look into what a vision would be for a successful implementation of that coordination. That'd be one thing that would be nice to see.
Okay.
The two other items I would like to look at is OEM structure and resourcing. I think that OEM, as we've all mentioned, when when they got their legs under them, performed well, but also has a lot of, it took a long time to get that done. And in the interim, and with the lack of information, a lot of things happened, as Mr. Minkoff, I think, referenced, that need to be really seriously looked at. So to that point, I would like to see the commission again take a look at what a vision for be frank, an independent and well-resourced OEM that is accredited. I think we should be explicit about what the expectation should be on the OEM front. Finally, with NES, I think we did a good job of trying to get as deep into the NES issue as we could in 2 hours or an hour and a half, reasonably. Unfortunately, it's not like the FIFA World Cup. You don't get extra time at the end. But I'd like us to consider, if we have a next step, reading the commission, digging deeper into the NES self-review, digging into the staff reports a little deeper, having some time to consider what information we now have, and if it's appropriate between now and our final report, potentially re-engage both OEM and NES back at this commission's meeting so that we can get into more detail. Because I do feel like we've done a great job, but we've scratched a little bit of the surface on some of those issues, and I'd like us to get more specific.
Right, well, remember, this is intended to be an interim report. It's a kind of a quick thing. So what I was trying to do was to pick out what seemed to be the salient, the most important threads in what we had seen. I would expect that a final report would do exactly what you're talking about, which is get into it in more detail. The other thing I was trying to, I'm speaking more than I probably should as chairman, but since I was the drafter of this, I need to discuss it. The other thing I wanted to make sure we, that we did was to not, I guess with the exception of Johnny, we're all kind of amateurs at this subject. So I wanted to sort of avoid getting too deep in the weeds about, well, we think this is exactly the way OEM should work and so on, and instead change that for a suggestion of accreditation and proper kind of review of organizational structure and so on from people who know what they're talking about and doing. So I think that's going to be a tension as to how deep we go for any of these into very specific recommendations and how much we stick with the notion of there were these kinds of shortcomings and a professional review and stuff is called for. But to your point, I would expect that the final report would take these sections and fill them out considerably. What's 3 paragraphs here? It can be 2 pages in a final report. Does that satisfy your issues?
Absolutely. And my only further concern only would be that with OEM specifically and with NES specifically, we were able to capture a good amount of what in the public forum of what would be useful to know. But I do think after, we speak with experts, Johnny has his, I'm sure, network of peers. I think it would be meaningful for us before we get to a final report to take what we've got here, digest it and re-engage OEM and NES specifically before a final report.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's my recommendation. Thank you.
All right.
Chair, if I may.
I may notes. Yes, please, as we go here.
Thank you. Just a few more thoughts that kind of bubbled up. I definitely agree with the chair's assessment that as an interim report, we want to be cognizant that there is more work to do before the final report. And I think that may be helpful if we highlight that in the executive summary, like right in that first sentence, something that is just reminding people that this is an interim report. To Vice Mayor Henderson's point earlier, some people will only read this 1-page executive summary and, we kind of have to get the most bang for our buck there. So I think that it would be helpful to highlight this is an interim report. We do have deeper work that we're doing that will be in the final report. I also agree with your assessment of balancing. We are not the professional, like we are professionals in our fields and experts in our fields, but we are not the preparedness experts. We have one expert. Thank you for your service. And I think that one way that we could possibly balance that is maybe highlighting an assessment from like an accredited entity or consultant or something of that nature. Because like we're always going to have opinions on what people could have done better, but we're just not the experts in that field. So I think it's, we're kind of highlighting what we saw, what we heard from the constituents, what we've heard from these agencies. But I do think that it would be maybe one of the recommendations would be the, and you have it here, like the independent outside professional expertise, like maybe highlighting that. And then just one more thing on page 2, and I know we're not there, but under OEM, you do highlight doing so will require more financial resources. I think that's fine for the interim report. I think once we get into that final report, I think we need to make sure that is like really clear. And I'm saying that from the sense of a council member, that what tends to happen with our constituency is that just for example, we invest more money in sidewalks and people will say, nobody walks over here. Why are you building sidewalks? And then a pedestrian is killed and they'll say, why don't you have sidewalks? And we saw with when Mayor...
You're preaching to the choir on this subject.
Right. When Mayor O'Connell took office, there was a significant investment in snowplows. And people got really upset and they said, it doesn't snow here. Why are y'all spending money on that? It's a waste of money. You're being fiscally irresponsible. And then the storm hits and then people say, why don't you have more snowplows? So I think that it's really important that we highlight, yes, this is going to take an investment in OEM, and also people understanding that this is going to take an investment in OEM. Like if we want them to do more, we have to fund that, and people have to understand that funding comes with a cost.
Right. One of the things we have going on that Kendra is working with some of her, I guess interns, is to collect up for, I think I suggested cities between 500,000 and 1 million people, of which there's 20 of them or something in the United States, to look at what their budgets for their emergency management are, just to give us a sense of where we sit in the scheme of things there. That doesn't determine what we should do, but if we're half of what everybody else is, that tells us something.
And Chair, if I may, for those peers, I would just encourage that we also, it's not always just about population. We have a scale issue that not everyone, we are 526 square miles, and that has an immense impact. Our lane miles, right. We are really big, and in an event like this, that is a real kind of X factor for us. And so I would just make sure that among our peers, we have some of those city-county consolidateds with larger geographical footprint, even if their population is lower.
And if I could just add to that, not to give too much homework on that, but the sources of those resources, because to the council lady's point, pro tem, is that is, it comes at a cost, but also some cities, based on what I've read and what I've understood, some cities have really robust grant funding sources that do not come at the cost of their taxpayers, ratepayers, et cetera. And Nashville is, lacking in some of those resources competitively. So I would like to see kind of what those peer cities, the Denvers, the Charlottes, the Austins, how we rank in terms of how we're capturing those deserved dollars from federal sources.
Are these interns, Kendra, are they actually asking for budgets?
We're just now starting that review, but yes, asking for budgets and comprehensive resources used to fund is included in that.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Let's just make sure that as they ask for that they get it in enough detail that you can tell where the funds came from, whether out of a general fund or out of some grant program or FEMA or something else. Yeah. Okay. The conversations we have here really it sort of brings me to the the one major point I'd like you to take a look at with this. And that is when we started this out, and in that initial document that I gave you about how to proceed on this, we talked about an interim report as being a sort of like statement of facts and observations with the recommendations to come after we've had a little more time to talk with them, do additional work that comes up, and so on. It seemed to me that the issue of OEM working hard, but perhaps not being structured organizationally or funded or whatever to the extent to which you need it. There were a lot of things that seemed to be slipping between the cracks because of those kinds of issues. That was worthy of actually coming up with a recommendation in this to the mayor. That there's no sense waiting for next, November or December to do that. That this idea of some kind of a formal outside professional review to look at those structures and so on was a recommendation we ought to make just now and let the mayor get on with it. The idea being that if it does require additional resources, you might know the structure and the size of that before the budget preparation process next year. So I'm stepping out a little bit from the original concept to the idea of putting that recommendation forward as like, before we talk about anything else, look, this is something that probably needs to get underway, and we don't need to wait 3 or 4 or 5 more months before we make that recommendation. How is that appropriate, and how comfortable are you with that?
Mr. Chair, I think you're thinking exactly how these thoughts are coming together from the commission and exactly how we sort of need to move. If you think back, I think NES was able to conduct their after-action review, and was about 90 days, thereabouts. So if the mayor can start to make that move here soon, we might have something later this fall, or it comes before we make our final recommendations, that we might be able to use in that final report. So I think this is a great idea. Kendra, also too, with the interns are doing this benchmarking survey materials, and I think we talked about this, I think it'd be really good for organizational and structure how these departments report back through whether it's through the mayor's office, whether it's through the fire department, whatever it is. Also get that, because I think that's very important, because I think we're starting to see is that how the alignment with Nashville OEM may not serve what we need for the city of Nashville. So I just want to concentrate and see what other cities are doing too. And so I think that's very important.
If I may, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for recognizing me. First, I want to say how grateful I am for the intentionality that went into the creation of this preliminary report. I know that the aggregation of data is something that's very difficult. We had a number of different interviews. We've had a number of different conversations and discussions with both entities within Metro, but also within the community-based organizations and so forth, who gave testimony and provided resources and support. And so I want to give gratitude and appreciation to all who participated in that process. And I know that the aggregation of trying to kind of surface what's most important at this time, particularly as it relates to OEM, was really critically important. And so thank you for the effort that went into that. I also wanted to kind of point out that I know that we're still in the preliminary stage, but as we begin to prepare the final report, if there could be a way for us to surface some of those stories, as were kind of alluded to earlier in the public comment, to talk about some of the issues and what was happening on the ground, I think will be very important, particularly for our membership, to be able to kind of understand what's happening both in this winter storm situation, but also as we anticipate moving into much larger kinds of activities that are going to be coming. The Super Bowl is coming in 2030. And if we are not prepared to meet the challenges of mass issues or mass challenges related to public safety, then we could put ourselves at a strategic disadvantage. And so we want to make sure that we're not only looking at this as an opportunity to be able to educate the public about this winter storm emergency and what happened, but also that we're doing a really good job of anticipating how we can remain competitive as a city going forward. And so I appreciate the vision that went into shaping this preliminary report. I know that it's not easy to collect all of this information in a way that is digestible, especially for those folks who, like myself, are not as familiar with so many of the acronyms. but I do appreciate both the effort that has gone into the drafting of the report and the way that it's anticipating a way forward. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I, in writing this, was looking for sort of specific examples of how coordination didn't work or something like that, because that often is illustrative to people. And to be honest, we were kind of light on that, on those kinds of things in the universe. So I think it might be something that we just focus on as we talk about, you know, if we continue to have conversations, I don't know, with OEM and you're talking about communication and coordination, to actually, if we can actually pull up some examples of there was some discussion of that around the sheltering stuff. But when I was drafting this, I was feeling a lack there of the ability to sort of illustrate with a concrete example. And we've got some time. We can do that. But that's a very good point. Other thoughts? Did you have something about it? You're okay. Then, okay, so I've got the picture on number one as to what you want, and then the second point I want to make in this was that where there were shortcomings, they seem to be more on the subject of coordination and the ability to present a unified picture to the mayor and to the public and so on of what exactly was going on. But that the individual departments actually, and we spoke about NDOT a little bit earlier, actually did a good job of going out and working within the constraints that they had and so on to make things happen. I wanted to call that out. But first of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, there was a desire to push down number one a little further into the thing. Do you feel the same way about this one?
Mr. Chair, I have to agree with that. One thing that I think that we also heard, and I'm not really sure this was in there, but we heard is that there were large groups of people who came through, and we spoke about training to the departments, training between the departments, training from OEM. And if you look in that emergency management field, is that training and exercises are extremely important. That's typically where you sort of learn and meet these challenges before you're trying to do this. And it's 3 degrees outside and the lines are down on the road, right? So I think training, it's not just planning. It's training, it's exercises, it's planning. It's all of these. You combine all that together, and that's where you get a well-run organization that can work. And I think that might be a shortfall that I think we sort of saw a little bit at OEM, but we heard that from other departments. That it'd be nice to get some training, and training I think is very crucial. And when we start to look at that as well too.
If we were to, we're going down this road of, I think, suggesting accreditation, would the process of accreditation naturally bring training? Is that an important component of the accreditation process?
And most definitely. Training is once you build the plans, the next step is to train on the plans and understand what the plans are, what the expectations are, not just for OEM, but for the departments and for the people that are actually working in those operational units. So it starts at the very top. I mean, it actually starts with the mayor's office and comes all the way down to the operational units, the people that are boots on the ground out there doing the work. And so there's different levels, there's different aspects, there's different complexities to what that is. But it starts at the top and trickles all the way down to the bottom. So once you have those plans, training is very important. Exercises are very important. We do that all the time. You might commonly term TTX, tabletop exercise. And some departments, some cities do full functional exercises where you actually put people out, you perform through the goals, through the objectives. But tabletop exercises are very important. Very strategically can align gaps, identify gaps, and align corrective actions well before you get to that point of needing it and before that storm hits. So, yes.
Other thoughts on this? And do you want this pushed down a little bit along with number one?
Chair, would you restate that question? I'm not
sorry?
clear on your question.
What I'm saying is I took out of the discussion of number one of people saying, yes, this is true, but so that we don't seem like we're here just shilling for business as usual, let's not put that let's put some of the more substantive critical findings a little higher up on the list. And so my question really was, is this in that same category in your mind? It ought to be pushed down a little bit to make it more of the form of, the overall text is there were lots of shortfalls in these various ways, and oh, by the way, the Metro employees and NES employees really stepped up to this and helped to mitigate, the effects of some of these by their commitment and creativity and so on. Yes.
I think that I think it makes sense to do it in the order that you have it, but just put number one as the last one, because if we start with the agencies effectively manage the operations within their departments, then going to NES, who carried the lion's share of both criticism and responsibility, and then going into OEM and the work that they did, and then ending it out with Metro employees and the work that our employees did. I think that, and I'm sorry, I missed the one about the daily press conferences. And the community partners, I missed those two. Maybe putting the employees after OEM, but then before community partners and Metro press conferences. So going in the order of 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 5, 6 would be my recommendation.
And Chair, if I may, not to complicate 2, 3, 4, 1, 5, 6, et cetera.
I just wrote that all down.
I'm sorry. I think, the note that I had, and that was prior to this input here, so I'm trying to kind of contextualize it within my initial thinking, was really that, it should be OEM off the top, because functionally and operationally, that should be the primary coordination for Metro government. And of course, NES is sort of parallel tracking that, but even there, it is incumbent on our OEM to have that information and coordination, which informs all the other departments and so forth. So for what that's worth, I'm not going to contradict the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but I just conceptually, I think leading with kind of OEM and Metro's role in response generally, I think just providing a little bit more context of how it sort of should work. I know that there's an awkward line there, but the presumption of what would happen in a extreme situation like this, I think has kind of OEM at the top in the lead. And so from my perspective, that's sort of the informational flow that I was looking for when I first read this.
I will agree with that assessment, and I will now change my recommendation to 4, 2, 3, 1, 5, 6. And that would be starting with OEM and then going to Metro agencies managing their own departments, then going to NES, then talking about Metro employees, and maybe Metro employees could go before NES to keep the Metro theme together if that makes sense for people, and then going into community partners and press conferences.
I think it makes sense. Yeah, I inevitably, I guess, in drafting this, looked at it from the standpoint of what does the mayor need to know? He's the person that asked that. And certainly the top of the list of that is that I have in my Metro, portfolio of departments and so on, I have a department that's capable of doing this stuff, of reaching out, of roping in NES if they're being recalcitrant, and so on. And that's the reason why in the executive summary we kind of put that right up at the top. Okay, I think we have got pretty good on that. Let's go to NES. I'm not adopting your order yet. I'll get in there. Let's go to NES. This, in some ways, I think is really critical. In the month since this thing started, and I've run into people, the thing they always ask me about is NES. I mean, in the public's view, this is a review of NES, not of other things. And so I wanted to be sensitive to the fact that we fully addressed that stuff. On the other hand, I have to say, while I think NES had multiple screw-ups in the first week, I think they have done a lot of things right since then in terms of bringing in some of the outside consulting that they have, and I think they're generally working on it. So I wanted to identify those, but not just use this as a way to beat up on, to beat up on them. So I tried to pick out of it what I thought were 2 or 3 major themes that came out of it, just so the public knows, what they think was important or not. There was a lot of stuff, and if you have read either the preliminary or the final report of their outside consultant, there's a lot of detailed information in there. But would like to know whether you think this captures kind of the picture with NES in a fair way, or whether this needs modification.
I think it's fair, and I think it's well written, and I think it hits what I think the public's concerned with. The only thing I would, and maybe I'm missing it in it, but I have a lot of comments from people that they just felt the communication from NES was not handled well. And I think part of it, I'm not trying to bring a bad subject, but people got very upset when they saw huge contracts going out for public relations. They've just now hired their own internal communicator, and I'm just wonder if that should be touched on a little bit, improving communication with the public as a whole, and what steps need to be taken there.
Yeah, I want to concur, if that's all right, that I think that it's understood that there are both failures in operations and communications that have to be addressed, and I would maybe see that as its own bullet point within this to address that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Yeah, I had tried to stick that stuff. I may have been too cute about that. I tried to stick that stuff into the NES technology was outdated, because some of the communications issues had to do with the fact they just didn't have the tools to, people would call in with their outages and the computers weren't working. I'd also put a sentence at the end there, and the immediate aftermath statements from management came across as defensive and insensitive to the challenges, to recognize that was a failure of communications as well. But pulling out the communications, I think, is a good idea. I will do that.
I would absolutely concur with that, because there was a technology component embedded within that as to the outage notices, but there is sort of that systems technology-based notices, but adjacent to that was consistency and clarity in just general communication that was very lacking. And so I think that should concur be a separate bullet. And I would also suggest that rather than, final report is now available, I think being explicit, the independent evaluator, the after action, all that, and enumerate those here, and potentially just providing those.
Okay, do you want that
links.
in the interim report?
I think it should be an interim report. I mean, if they have already been completed, and they are items that we are referencing and we're pointing in Word the community to, I think that it should be linked there, because I think invariably there's somewhat of a conflation, right? There was the very quick engage the attorney to get the thing, and then I think there was something else, parallel tracking, that was maybe internal after action. Then they had the 4 pillars, and I am struggling myself, and I should be more knowledgeable to articulate specifically what those component parts were. But I do think for even as it relates to our departments, like what work has been done, that may be in the timeline, but sort of pulling it forward and linking it there, that those are the existing resources to which the community can refer and this commission is working with, and just, again, making those more explicit in the interim report.
Okay. Good thought. Yes.
I have another thought. I think one more thing that would be helpful to add as a preliminary observation, and I did read a sentence about it, but I'm curious as to if it makes sense to have its own number or bullet point, or if it makes sense to add it in the executive summary. But I think it's also important to frame or contextualize like the historic nature of this storm. So like we're highlighting some of the things that went well, as well as opportunities for improvement. And that's absolutely critical, and that has to be the lion's share of this report. But I also think that we have to frame or make sure that people understand like how catastrophic the storm was, the amount of damage that was caused. You know, the NES, I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe they had to rebuild like half of their grid or something like that in like a really short period of time. I think it was like maybe a week or 10 days or whatever it was that they had to, in essence, like rebuild half of their grid. And I think that while some people have a good understanding of how the scale of the storm, I don't know that people just at large have a understanding of the scale of the storm. And if this was a smaller storm, we wouldn't be here today. Like if the storm was smaller, it wouldn't have caused this level of damage, and that would not have really opened the door for this commission to do this deep dive. So I think it may be important to just also like explicitly name that, not as an excuse, because we are taking, responsibility and accountability for these things that need to be improved. But we also just really have to name like how catastrophic the storm was.
Okay, I tried to capture that in that Roman numeral 2 background in the first 3 paragraphs. Are you saying that it ought to be not in the background and somewhere else?
I think it should be its own bullet point to just kind of set the tone of the report as to, that's really how we got here, is because the storm was so bad. So I think that it needs its own bullet point.
Right. And Kendra, one of the to-dos that I asked from your staff was to see if there's any way of describing the severity of the storm relative to other storms that happen in the country. I mean, is this we know it's a once-in-a-generation thing in Nashville, but how common is this kind of a storm across the United States every year? So are you making progress on that?
Yes, we started primarily with comparing it to other local storms, but we expect to have additional information on that we can include in the final report.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the National Weather Service has some parameters that they regard as being determinative of the severity of the storm, inches of ice accumulation or...
We'll put some additional thought around that.
Okay, all right. What else? Johnny?
Mr. Chair, I think one of the other bullet points, let me go back to that page. You hit on this. I read through the after action, the full report, and I just want to make sure you've got this in here, and I think this is clearly, NES's emergency response structure, like clearly defined roles, written procedures, and command structure. I think we heard through that is that they were struggling with their command structure, instant command system. They spoke about that. In fact, that's in their after action review, that they're doing instant command training from the top to the bottom. So I think that's a good bullet point that we keep in there. It was clearly that command structure where I think they were overwhelmed in a very short period of time, the scale. And we were just talking about this, and I was pulling this out. We were talking about stats. And at the height of that storm, I think if you go back and you look at that number, we were 231,000 outages. That's over 50% of the customers, not the people, but the customers. I mean, several people can be one customer. And if I go back and I also look in that timeline, I found this very interesting to see how impactful this was. But I think at one point, if I can remember this correctly, NES reported that I think they have between 200, 250 linemen that they typically have on a daily operation, right, that they use. And at the height of their operation in that repair, they had over almost 1,700 linemen working. That is a huge number to go from 200 up to 1,700 to just make those repairs. So agreed. They were overwhelmed in a short period of time, but having those emergency response procedures and all that training is, I think is very crucial. And you have that already, but I just want to make sure we highlight that.
All right, so are you suggesting modifications to that first bullet? Tell me, I'm not quite sure what.
No, sir. I just wanted to reiterate is that you had that in there and wanted to make sure as we're going through these bullet points, we keep that in there because it's clearly a lack of, clearly in the after action, that emergency response, instant command, preparedness, all of that. I just wanted to make sure that we kept that in there.
Right.
Okay.
No, well, in the consultant's report, I mean, one of the things they called out was, again, a lack of technology to manage large numbers of sort of outside personnel in that fashion. Something that I'm sure they're addressing. But you're exactly right that going from 250 people on the street to 1,700 people on the street is a huge change in the complexity of the management and so on. What else regarding it? Yes, please.
Go ahead, sir.
Chair, if
I'm
you don't
sorry.
mind, I was gonna follow up on what Mr. Vanderpool had to say about that. I think that, when I look at bullet point 3 about the requesting and acquiring external resources, I think this is really worth digging into deeper. I'm sure, as we've mentioned, there's going to be a lot more talk about this in the following final report. But I really think that a discussion of procurement about emergency procurement and proactive procurement around those services is an important thing for us to maybe mention at some point. Is that's something NES I do not see in NES's understanding of their after action in a way that I'm satisfied with, and also the staffing levels. I mean, I do think that technology can help us, but it's not a shortcut for the human intelligence that we've got, that we need on the ground. And I do think that it's worth, and at least I don't have a recommendation on a number or anything, but I do think it's worth us pointing out that anytime you're going from 200, roughly 200 line folks to thousands, is perhaps something that needs to be evaluated as whether that's even the best way to handle scale of that magnitude. And also, we need to have in this report, I believe, we've seen NES respond to their own analysis. We've seen them, have reaction to this, but I want to see what a future vision looks like. I don't think that a report that says NES is going to, trim the edges of their operation and will be okay next time is going to be sufficient, because I believe that we're going to see more events like this than once in a generation. I think we're going to see them more often, is my anticipation. And so I would like to see at least a challenge to NES to have a real vision for what the future of their organization looks like that is not reactive but proactive. That's my recommendation.
Okay, when you use the word procurement, just a thing, were there issues that you identified in the law or in practices having to do with procurement that were problematical for NES responding, or were you just using that as a general word to describe contracting outside?
So what I think we've identified somewhat in the public testimony, but also in their interactions with Metro government, is that NES's procurement is opaque compared to Metro government. There is not the same level of transparency. There's not the same level of accountability by the utility or its contractors, and that's something that I think would be a huge missed opportunity if we didn't address.
Okay.
Are we limited in that? I agree with that statement. Are we limited in any way because, unlike other the Metro agencies, they have a board of directors in which that makes the decisions in their board, or is that not a distinction?
Yeah, I don't I don't think so. I mean, I think they're set up. I mean, I've been working on this, but also lived with NES for a lot of years. You know, they're set up as this quasi-independent business, and I think, as I said at one point here, I think that in general has served it well. I mean, it's on board of directors that way, but it also has kind of produced this. We're not really, you know, we're not really in the same kindergarten with the rest of all these people, and that has to be. You know, a line has to be walked, I think, to make them more part of the overall emergency response. The question I was asking was, I know from my own experience, and this will probably be more as governor, that one of the things that has helped Tennessee in emergency responses has been that the governor, in fact, has quite a bit of power when it comes to procurement in emergency situations. I think of, for example, when Katrina hit New Orleans and we had large numbers of people with everything they still owned in their car coming across the state line and so on, the ability of the governor to just do things to fix that without being constrained was one of the things that was pointed out as one of the strengths of Tennessee's response. And one of the questions that I had about this was, is NES constrained in any way in its ability to respond to these things quickly by the lack of laws or laws that in some way, by constraining procurement in some ways, make it difficult to do things? To make a stupid example, if before you, I don't know, contract with an outside party, you had to, get quotes from 4 parties or something like that. That doesn't work in an emergency situation, but it's easy to imagine that in some way being a part of the process they have to go through. Do any of you have any experience with that? I mean, do you know anything about that subject? Johnny, did you?
So, the question: are you referring back to procurement? When things are elevated or when designation to emergencies, is that what you're?
Yeah, what I'm saying is like, okay, we're faced with an emergency. Okay, I need to do these things, and then the lawyers come in and say, no, you can't do that because of X, and you can't do that because of Y, and so on. And one of the things Tennessee has gotten good marks on over the years nationally has been the fact that, in fact, the governor does have a lot of power to do those things. Just as an example, what I'm talking about, I remember during the Katrina thing that one of the issues you had was large numbers of people who were in our state. They were dependent on medications for things like insulin and blood pressure and stuff like that. But, they had no idea where their doctor was. Their pharmacy no longer exists and so on. And we had the ability to tell pharmacists that if it's not a controlled substance drug, to tell them that if they had a prescription bottle for that, you can legally refill that for them, and so on. So it's just a matter of, if you hadn't had that power, you would have had a lot of people who did not, could not get the medications they needed.
So what I would say, a short answer to that, Mr. Chair, is that typically in these situations, when emergencies or we move into those areas where we're expecting a potential emergencies, all of that language is usually put into your emergency operations plan, right? You reach a new level. We've taken it from a level 4 to level 3 to level 2, all the way up to level 1. And those plans typically give that leadership the ability to make those decisions, to go outside of the normal box and put those protocols in place. And I think what we saw here for NES is that it speaks about their EOP. It was weak, it was non-existent, or there were parts of it that were missing. So yes, I think that language can be put in there, Mr. Chair. That can be put into those plans so that when they need to do that, when they need to pull those triggers and implement those procedures, they have that. But it has to go through a process. It usually has to be written, planned out, and agreed upon. I think is that for NES, that was something that was really missing, and they were grasping at straws at the very last moment. And when Sunday morning came, we were well behind the curve. We weren't even playing catch up. We were days away from getting people the power. So yes, I think the short answer is you can put that in, and it goes into those plans, and it gives those leadership the ability to make those decisions in a short period of time. I mean, we do that at Vanderbilt. I have the ability to procure, ask people to do things when we need it in an emergency type of situation. So yes.
Okay, and then, but one difference between Vanderbilt is that in government, there's a whole series of laws and policies relating to procurement, which Vanderbilt would not. It might be a policy in Vanderbilt, but it's not a law. And those things which are legal in nature, you can put whatever you want in the plan, but you still have to obey the obey the law. So one of the questions I would have for you is anyone aware of issues where there were legal constraints on NES or on OEM that could be addressed by the council or the state legislature to make sure that these parties had the powers necessary to act? To the extent to which it's a matter of metro policy, you can put that in the document you're describing.
And I'm not as concerned so much with the powers and flexibility of NES to do what they need to do,
Right.
so much as it is their execution of their of elevating those procurements and those assessments when they needed to do them, and in a way that's publicly accountable. And so where we're at now is we've got the council requesting those contracts be shared in the Metro portal, and to my knowledge, that still hasn't happened. We're still waiting for NES to have the same level of public accountability that Metro does in terms of what folks can even evaluate whether we're prepared for the next storm. That's one of my concerns.
And Chair, if I may, I think Council had a procurement working group within our larger budget and finance committee, and so I don't purport to understand off the top of my head what the emergency authorities are, but I do think, again, from a general system standpoint, right, if NES had ascertained that their comm staff was insufficient to a major crisis task and already had on board procured a consultant who it was understood in an emergency context, you would scale up and onboard those folks for that purpose. I don't think anybody would sort of quibble with that. And so I think it is kind of that being prescient and looking ahead, right? Like COVID, right? I kind of think, well, also the state of Tennessee within the emergency authority did all those, sock face masks, right? Like, I mean, there are things in retrospect with the best of intentions that people tried to sort of bring on board that, folks recognize was maybe not the best solution or an appropriate solution. So I think trying to balance the anticipatory having things in place, to Mr. Link's point, to then scale up. Like, what does the plan say that I can now flip this switch and do this thing or order that thing or call for more people, right? So that there are some sort of kind of a stack, I guess, of sort of in case of emergency, break this glass, and you have already procured those services to step into that space.
Yeah, I was listening for any things that were sort of a legal nature inhibiting procurement, and I didn't hear any during the course of those things. But I just wanted to be sensitive to that, because I mean, one of the things we want to recommend are things that the council or the state legislature might do to help us improve our emergency response.
Mr. Chair, just one point. I was looking at the timeline. I think this is very important. I'd like to maybe do some research on this myself, but I think this is very important. I noticed that the governor in the state of Tennessee, they went ahead and declared a state of emergency on day 1+1, which was Friday. So I'm wondering if what that actually means if the state moves into a declared state of emergency. What does that give local municipalities, governments, the city of Nashville? Does that give them flexibility when they move into that? I know you talked about the state having that, and they made that declaration before the storm, And I think they do that for a very specific reason, because it frees up power. It gives the leadership the ability to make those real-time decisions, whereas in the essence, sometimes you've got to go before the committees, or you've got to go before the lawyers, whoever it is. So I found that very important. So I think that's something to maybe do a little bit of research on, to see if the state, with that declaration, gives the authority to other areas like the city of Nashville to sort of fall under that ability during that period of time.
Okay. Make a note here, second. So what I wrote down to look here is what exactly does it mean for the state to say there's that there's a state of emergency? And is there an equivalent thing in Metro?
You'll see in the timeline that we did declare a local state of emergency. And so what I specifically wrote in my notes was, what's the distinction between state declaration of emergency versus local declaration of emergency, and what authorities do each create, and sort of how do they cascade and tier from one another?
Yeah. Now, I know at the state that there's a lot of stuff on the books that have carve-outs for states of emergency, and so you can do it. I don't know if that's the case with with Metro or not.
Yeah, it does. It does. I think some specific things that it does, and I'm looking at Hannah to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it allows emergency procurements and sort of allows you to access financial resources that you might not be able to otherwise.
Okay, I think for writing this, what I would like you to have is, would you just have somebody give me one paragraph on what state of emergency in the state of Tennessee means and what state of emergency in Metro means? I think that'll help to do that. Good point. Yeah. What else?
I have something, Chair. I don't know if we're here yet. Are we under number 4, or are we
No, we're
under
just
3?
we're finishing out number 3 and about to go to number 4.
Okay, I'll hold my comment.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think I have enough to take a fresh shot at the NES stuff. And now we go to number 4, OEM, which is now back up. It's up at the beginning of this and so on. So we want to do this right and carefully. And I think that first paragraph sums up pretty well what the bottom line was for me of listening to everything. But I certainly would like to know what you think about it and what you think needs to be changed, upgraded, removed.
I just have two thoughts on it. I think that I think overall it is well written, and that it captures areas of opportunity for OEM and areas that they need to focus on, like moving forward. I know earlier I made mention about an independent consultant and an accreditation review. That's all clearly named here. So I'm very glad that that's like really clearly named here. I think my just 2 small thoughts on this are, it says the storm event surfaced clear weaknesses in the preparedness planning and capability to integrate the information. I think what I heard from OEM was a little different. I think for me, it seemed as though it was more of a, I think their vision for how they should move forward was a little bit different than some of the vision of us. So I don't know that it's necessarily fair to characterize it as a weakness as much as it may be more appropriate of like an area of opportunity to do something differently. And I don't want to like mince words, but I just think that that's like an important distinction, because in listening to OEM talk about like their rationale for why they did certain things, you can see that it was things that they had thought through. There was a rationale. We just may not agree with the assessment. And that kind of goes to my second point about the decision to operate virtually until several days after the storm was considered questionable by multiple committee members. I think that that is a fair assessment because from my recollection, several people did have that concern. I was on the opposite end of that spectrum. I do think that it was important that they operated virtually for a few different reasons. I mean, people are still, during those first few days, you had people that were stuck in their homes. You had people who couldn't get out on the roads. We talked about earlier in the report with like down trees and power lines, how it was not, everyone was not able to like navigate the streets. I remember when it was the tornadoes that happened in March 2020, a lot of council members, we were like proactively going out, driving our district to try to like report down trees and power lines and help folks in our neighborhoods. And we were asked to like stay off the roads and to make sure that, you know, we're only putting people on the roads that absolutely have to be there. An argument could be made that those are people that absolutely had to be there. But I also think that them operating virtually until it was safe for them to start meeting in person, I think that that was a good decision. And I think that that kind of goes back to the idea of, I don't know if this was a weakness from OEM or just like a difference in strategy. So I just wanted to name that some members do think that they should have immediately went to in person, but I do think that, at least me, think that them operating virtual was the correct move.
Oh, okay, but this is one we have to disagree on. I feel very, very strongly the other way. I mean, police officers had to come in, firefighters had to come in, ambulance drivers had to come in. And this whole thing started back in the activation back in Thursday when none of these issues of safety occurred. I mean, it was still days away before you could move around on the roads. No, I thought that was a fundamental failing of the process. But I understand that not every commission member would agree with that, and so I just characterize it as some commission members felt. Is that okay with you to leave it like that?
Before I answer, is there anyone else that thinks that virtual wasn't appropriate? Because I think if I'm the only one, then I think it's fine to leave it as this. I think if other people think so, then maybe just add in a sentence of, you know, some of the commission, like the commission was split and some commissioners did feel that virtual was the appropriate way. But I want to leave space to see if anyone else had a thought on that.
I would think that the public would expect them to be in person. I mean, I would think that would be just an expectation.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, it's a little bit backwards. I think if we start from what is best practice from an industry perspective, right? Storm of this magnitude anticipated, which people at what level go ahead and get in person, anticipating that. And yes, maybe some people are virtual, some people are in person. I absolutely respect and appreciate that there is at certain juncture is a safety and access issue that people just literally cannot be in person. But I think the criticism is that that should have been anticipated, even if it was, I mean, what is that determination? 10% chance, 5% chance, whatever, how many people go be in person and stand that up. And so I'm not really comfortable with like was considered questionable by committee members. I think it's more maybe some different language there. It's fair to indicate that OEM, defended that and that, there maybe wasn't unanimity, but I think sort of flipping it and starting from best practice expectation and placing it more there rather than just kind of what our feelings were on it, right? Like I would like to know, is there some objective standard around which the expectation in the industry would be? I don't know if our colleague.
Well, what I would say to that is that what does the SIMP say? Is that, Angie, is that acronym correct? Is it CEMP, emergency The EOP for
Right.
Nashville.
That would be my expectation is
Right.
storms of a certain magnitude
Right.
in anticipation, X days out. These people will go in person and sleep there. These people will stay at home. Like, I feel like that shouldn't have been like a game time decision. It should have already been known from my perspective.
I agree. So I think the ambiguity here is there's a plan. The city of Nashville has a plan. We asked to take a look at that. So there's probably information in there that talks about activation of EOCs, right? At what level are you going to activate the EOC based upon the hazard and the level of risk, right? And I would think is that it snowed Saturday, right? We were running around. It really wasn't that bad on Saturday. Now Sunday morning, it was game over for a lot of people. So I think is that there's clearly directions probably within that document, that CMP, that sort of spell through that. I would be very interested to see what the document says and then correlate that back to actually what OEM actually happened.
And just to clarify, have we not yet seen that document?
The citywide emergency management plan is considered confidential. We have, so within the SharePoint folder for this particular commission, we have a summary of that. I was just conversing with Hannah to see if it would be appropriate to have an excerpt. So we'll look into that.
Okay, let me get into that. Why is that confidential? What is there about it that makes it, and is there any legal basis for calling it confidential, or is that just the mayor saying it's confidential?
So documents are confidential because there's a statute that allows them to be. So this is for, I think, security purposes.
Okay, so what is the reason why the emergency management plan is confidential?
Because there's sensitive information about, I think, it's not just limited to natural disasters like this. I think that it's any type of disaster. And so for that reason, state law keeps it confidential.
It allows it to be confidential. It doesn't require it to be confidential.
I'd have to check the language. I think that sometimes it does require, some statutes do require it to be kept confidential.
If I could, we did a tour of like the water treatment facilities, and we had this very similar conversation about like why certain things are kept confidential, and it is to protect the totality. Like if it was open to the general public for everyone to know all of the security measures, then that leaves us vulnerable for like terrorist attacks and things of that nature. So my understanding is that a level of this has to be confidential in an effort to like keep us protected so that we're not vulnerable from these types of attacks and threats.
Well, but I mean, I guess what I'm doing is I'm saying if you have a commission of people to look into this kind of thing and you don't have access to the key document in Metro that addresses it, that's kind of a problem. And the question is, I mean, can things that are required by law to be confidential be redacted in some way? I mean, I guess if you, I'd much rather see the language of it than I would a summary from somebody.
Sure, and that's, I was going to say, like, there might be a couple options, but one option would be a summary or to have somebody come and maybe like testify to what the SIMP says. I think I'll need to review the state law that talks about confidentiality for this, and then probably talk to the attorney for OEM, and we can see what the options are. But it may be possible to have like a limited section of the SIMP for review.
A quick question, and you were talking about the statute of limitations. You were quick to answer that. What are you talking about, statute of limitations? A matter of years, a matter of months?
Sorry, just the statute that limits production. Sorry, not statute of limitations in terms of years, but just a statute that requires or allows for this to be held confidential.
Okay, and what is that normally?
What's the statute?
Normally.
So under state law, most everything is subject to production as a public record, but state law does allow for certain things to either be kept confidential or require some information to be kept confidential.
Okay. Well, knowing that we would probably have needed this kind of information, should that have been checked out in the beginning just to see that we had the necessary information?
It's difficult to say because in part, sometimes it's unclear what the commission's going to need to look at before you really dig into the work.
Okay, so in situations such as that, Since we're talking about OEM information and, some things I can understand for security purposes. But knowing that we were going to go to this degree, looking into the OEM and looking into how all this is connected, could we have gotten some type of information that we could have looked at that would have been inclusive, so we don't have to now try to see if we can go through attorneys and things of that nature?
So I think from the beginning, we knew that this would be something that was probably going to be required to be confidential. And I think our plan was sort of to have the commission do what they can without actually having to access the confidential document. And I think that we may be at a point now where we've reached kind of the commission needs more than just what was able to be accessed.
Because normally in a situation such as that, you always want to be proactive and be prepared. And in a situation such as this, knowing that's what we were, here to do, those are kind of things that you want to make sure that you have as an option, saying, okay, let's be prepared in case this is necessary. Let's find out from the legal department what we can and cannot, relay to the commission. Because I think if we would have done that, we probably would have been a little further ahead.
Yeah, I believe that we did do that at the beginning, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just share, we did have that conversation when we first met with OEM and NES in particular, because we knew that those were two agencies from which we were going to be requesting a lot of information. We did this for two reasons. One is we wanted to ensure that we were being efficient with how we requested information, but also being sensitive to information that we might not want to share very widely due to some of the reasons that Ms. Zeitlin spoke to. And so we did have that conversation at the time. Where we settled was we requested a summary of the city's emergency management plan, and that is in your SharePoint folder. And so I think as a next step, we're happy to attach it to an email for you all, so you're not having to dig through the SharePoint to find it, but I would recommend that everyone review that. We'll also look into whether or not we can get a specific excerpt for responding to this question. But if there are also other specific questions, I think it would be helpful for us to understand so we can figure out how much of this plan might be of interest to the commission.
Okay, I'm not entirely happy with that. I guess what I'm saying is you have a commission of people, including elected officials, former elected officials, and all that sort of thing. No terrorists that I'm aware of on the commission. If it's confidential, the fact of letting a commission member see it does not make it public. This is a commission that was created by executive order of the mayor and so on. And I guess my question is, I can understand, do I think you should email everybody a copy of it? No. But if I said, I want to read that thing, and you'd say, come down to the main library and we'll make it available to you, I would expect you to do that. And my question would be, is there any particular reason why any member of the commission who wants to look at that under controlled circumstances? Happens all the time in the Congress. I mean, there's secure reading rooms you go to and look at confidential items. And there's also the question of, who determines when something is marked confidential? What is the determination about who it's confidential from and who has access to it?
So it really depends on what the state law is that's keeping it confidential. But I'd say normally it's kind of whoever needs the information as in the scope of their employment with Metro would be who is allowed to access that information. I'm trying to think of an example, but we have multiple departments will work on permits, and some of the information that comes through the permitting process might be confidential. If that's only something that needs to be accessed by one department, we would keep it confidential from the other departments, even though they're still acting on that same permit.
Chair, I apologize. No, go ahead. If I may, I think I respect and appreciate the need for confidentiality, but there is a pretty broad spectrum, right? And so I understand, systems, water system, electrical system, at the kind of terrorism end of the spectrum, like things that individual bad actors could do. This is a kind of Mother Nature, force majeure weather kind of situation, and so it seems that it might be possible to compartmentalize. I would presume and hope that the plan speaks to flood event, ice winter event, tornadic event, et cetera. And so I think what I'm hoping that we can understand as the Winter Storm Response Commission would be, what does the plan specify balanced against best practice for, with a storm of this magnitude coming, not known to be snow or ice, what was the appropriate thing to do and activate and do at what time? And did we do what our plan said? And is our plan aligned with best practice? So that specific request, given the purview of this commission, I think is appropriate. And then I respect the various layers of how you access it and et cetera. But I think, again, it's sort of a compartmentalized ask. It's not show us the whole big thing, so that's my perspective. Thank you.
Quick question. As we all have seen this, and we've been looking through this for quite some time, and of course, the legal department is aware of everything that we're seeing, that you guys are seeing as well, too. My question is there any other documents that are considered confidential or legal that we may need to see that may be of benefit to help us with this investigation that we aren't aware of at this point?
I was going to say, I think that you are aware of all the documents that exist, but there may be additional documents that you have not been granted full access to. Kendra was just saying that there may be some water documents that are similarly protected because they go to they go into detail about our water system, and so they're kept confidential, kind of under that same security.
So
provision.
There isn't anything else except for just the water documents. So I just want to make sure, because I don't want to be caught off guard and we're reading through this and then we say, okay, is this confidential if it's not confidential? I just want to know, do we have all the information we need to give a fair assessment of what is confidential and what isn't confidential?
So I think based on what has been requested by the commission, we have at least made it an initial attempt to try to give you all access to anything that's confidential. Obviously, we're having a very robust discussion about the citywide emergency management plan. I think we've got a couple of questions we need to ask. One thing I do want to make sure I emphasize for this group is there is a lot of material that you already have access to in the SharePoint. And I think as we discussed earlier, when we were trying to determine whether or not it would make sense to request internal communications from departments, we made the decision not to go down that pathway because it would be really hard to appropriately scope, and it would create a volume. Something that I have, I guess, observed throughout our discussions is there is a lot of material that I don't think we have publicly discussed as a commission that is sitting in the folders that you all have access to. And so one thing I would suggest is that after today's meeting, we spend some additional time, or each of you spend some additional time going through those folders. There's a lot that we've already requested from our departments, specifically OEM and Nashville Electric Services that's sitting in there. But there are also a lot of interview summaries that I think reflect feedback that wasn't necessarily presented in our public hearings. And so I know that seems like I'm taking it a very different direction, but I think we've taken at least an initial effort at trying to give you all access to what we think you need. If after going through that again, putting aside the SEMP and some of the specific questions asked today, we're happy to, again, figure out the best way to give access to any documents that would be deemed confidential that you don't feel you already have access to. We want to make sure you have what you need to do.
And I just want to chime in that Dr. Apkowitz and Hannah, I will say that in between meetings, I've made, some requests for information, and they've been exceptionally responsive to it. So, and I know that they're in some situations, there's a lot more information in there than I can even digest between meetings. And so I want to thank them for all the work they've put in to get this huge repository of documents to us in the SharePoint. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, if I go back and look at our hearing summary for OEM on preparation and planning, bullet 2, Metro's emergency response is governed by the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, CEMP, a framework that outlines departmental roles and responsibilities during major incidents. The CEMP does not include hazard-specific annexes. Instead, it provides role clarity and interagency expectations across emergency support functions. So, what I'm hearing is that, perhaps it should, right? Perhaps the plan should be specific to again, the purpose of the winter storm response, flood response, terrorism incident response. I don't know if that's an appropriate ask, but that may be why that was a kind of a challenge to provide, because it wasn't maybe compartmentalizable based on the plan. But I'll step back out of here. Yes,
Mr. Chair, I want to. And we're talking here, we were talking earlier, and another commissioner brought this up about things that are confidential in regards to infrastructure, right? That is something that, those are materials, information that typically the general public does not need to see, right? I truly understand that. But some of the questions that we're talking about here are EOC activation levels. I don't think, I'm going to go on the record right now, that parts of that CMP or that CMP ought to be made available to this commission for review. I don't believe is that we can fully understand, and believe it or not, the CMP is the core foundation of how OEM should operate. And having an understanding and seeing that is the basic understanding for this commission to be able to do their work and do it work effectively. I'm just going to go on the record and say that, because I think there's core questions, and I feel like that's going to be very important for our final recommendations. So thank you.
Chair, I really loved your recommendation of providing like a reading room where we can like come in and just like read the information. And I know that Attorney Zeitlin mentioned that she was going to look into the statute of the state law to determine if this is confidential by state law or just under what circumstances we are dealing with the legalities of it. So maybe as one recommendation that could possibly satisfy all the things, like once you look into the state law, if maybe you all could determine if there was a way for legal to review the document to determine if there was anything that absolutely had to be redacted from us viewing, and taking that measure if it was something that absolutely has to be redacted, and then providing us access to a reading room where we could come in and review the materials. That way it's not in an email, it's not subject to open records, and we are able to read it and access it.
Yeah, Kendra, I understand there's a lot of material there that can be useful, but I mean, this comprehensive management plan, just echo what Johnny said. It is, it's kind of a foundational document. And again, confidentiality in this context is not quite the same as labeled top secret in the federal government or something. If Metro employees have access to it, I'm sure the FBI is not doing background checks on the Metro employees before they're allowed to see this document in the way that you would with a federally secret document. So I guess I just request that I would like to, and any other commission member would like to, in some sort of controlled circumstance, have an opportunity to read the plan and take notes from it. And if there's any issue with confidentiality, we can run those, anything we want to say by the legal department. It's kind of a foundational document to a lot of these issues that are coming up here. And the notion that a commission like this, which has got elected officials and former elected officials and everything else on it, somehow can't view, this confidential material strikes me as a little odd. Will you check in that for me?
Yeah, we've got that noted as a high priority action item, and we'll circle up with the team soon.
Okay, let's continue on with this OEM stuff here. The first bullet point is really the key thing we've been saying here, which is, look, OEM is probably structure that would be great 20 years ago and may not be what the best current prices are. I mentioned the whole thing about mass care issues. That was the area in which most of the conflicts discussion came up about confusion and so on. And then the EOC activation, which we will find a way to say that satisfies everybody. Anything you would add to that list of these are important things to know about OEM? Yes.
I think one thing that's important to note, and I believe this is like mentioned somewhere else in the report, I remember reading it, but one thing that I faced as a council member, and OEM was really good about their response to this, but I think Metro government as a whole has to think about things like language barriers and how different communities feel safe. So, for example, when there was the conversation around sheltering, I believe the initial method was that they were, for people who could not get out of their homes, we were sending someone to their homes to help drive them to a shelter. And I can't remember if it was like someone from the sheriff's department or the police department, but there was like some form of a public safety officer that was the one that was going to the homes to like drive people. But not all communities feel safe being picked up by a police officer or a sheriff's department, someone from the sheriff's department. There was also lots of concerns about language access and making sure that individuals who, if English is not their primary language, that they understand like what resources are available as well. So OEM was amazing at like responding to that when council members kind of brought those issues up to them, but I think Metro as a whole, and in this case because we were talking about OEM, but we just need to think about those things like on the front end when we're making these assessments as opposed to rectifying it on the back end.
I believe the gentleman that testified from the public today, I would like to see his written remarks to you because I think that might address some of this in mass care.
Agreed.
Mr. Chair, also too, I think that Commissioner Hunt, you've spoken a little bit about this. Ethan, you've spoken a little bit about funding, not just for the department, but at OEM, that department, if I understand it correctly, has opportunities for federal grant money. There might be some state grant money that comes into that. So I feel like is that you've spoke a little bit about that, about where that money is coming into the department, how it's being spent, where it's going, this type of that whole process. I feel like is that might be something we continue to explore. I know you spoke a little bit about that and had a little bit of a passion about that. So I feel like that needs to be included as part of this, that operational and that funding and where all that money's going. Because it seems like, from what I'm seeing, is that the Office of Emergency Management that we have today in the city of Nashville is a shell of what we probably should have. Just looking at other organizations around the country, based upon the size, and Commissioner Henderson spoke about this earlier, and I think are we the largest metropolitan government in the United States? If not, we're one of the top, right? Size-wise, you're talking size. So when you start putting organizations that are responsible for that many people and that much space, area and time, you need complex organizations, and you need people and resources that can be able to support the city and what we need to be, because we are hosting the Super Bowl.
That's right.
We are going to have more storms. So I think funding, grant money, where that's coming, where it's going, needs to be a part of that picture. Thank you.
And I would say too, Commissioner links and my colleague as well, I would ask Kendra, within Metro, I know this is coming up on council before, where historically council was feeling as though comparative to peers, we were leaving kind of a diversity of grant operations on the table. And there has been kind of a long-standing conversation about large departments like health, police, et cetera, having a grant-specific person, right? Whether not just to track the current grants in their stewardship, but proactively to seek those grants, and whether that person should live sort of at the general Metro executive level and or internal to departments. And so it feels like perhaps there is a person like that at MNPD, really kind of optimizing, and we are seeing come through our agenda and our Budget and Finance Committee a fair amount of grants in that space. I can't necessarily speak to fire OEM in that space, but one might contemplate from a staffing and funding perspective, might we take an approach at that is similar to how we kind of, our Public Health and Safety Committee, right? It's not just MNPD, or it could be additive, but it is also fire and OEM. So to that specific recommendation, how do we operationalize that, and what do we have as their existing structure, and what could we augment? I feel like in Metro sometimes we just try to add a person to address an issue that is sometimes a systemic issue. And so I want to make sure we balance that correctly. So thank you.
Okay, we are coming down toward the end of our time, so let me just think. On the subject of OEM, we've had, I think, a good discussion there. There are two items further in here I just want to make sure you're comfortable with. One of them is the suggestion that Metro's emergency response needs to be modernized, and that OEM is the right place to do that, which seems to me a pretty straightforward management principle, but I want to make sure you're all comfortable with that notion. And then second of all, since there is an established accreditation process and others around us, including the state, have gone through it, the feeling is that that's a good way to get into a lot of the gory details of what goes on in OEM, and also because you require reaccreditation every, 5 years, 3 years, what is it? 4 years. I think it's 4 years on the and so on. That's also a way of keeping things up to date and not letting them get stale. Are you comfortable with both of those notions? Yes. Okay.
Chair, if I may, on
yes,
OEM, so it seems like the two explicit recommendations at this juncture are the accreditation, as you just spoke to, but maybe a little more ambiguous, and I would hope maybe we could get a little more specificity, is the recommendation of a consultant review. And I do feel generally, while the interim findings or the concerns are very explicit here, both by bullet and underlining, I feel like sometimes though they're in here, the recommendations are a little lost in the body text. And so I would ask maybe that we, in formatting, try to make more explicit, like this is what is being recommended. Okay. And for the team the accreditation, I am fine with that as a standalone, but I do think there is some potential nuance or ambiguity in the kind of the consultant ask and what that might look like. And it looks like Ms. Abkowitz is seeking recognition on that point, but.
It is a question perhaps for the commission to consider that I've thought about as I've listened to the discussion, and that is, how are we planning, if both things are included, what is the distinction between the accreditation process and the expert review?
I think an expert review is designed to give you the tools to go through accreditation.
Right. And I think it's a two-step process, right? It's through a review, conduct the review, and a recommendation out of the review might be obtain an accreditation with the EMAP, right? It's you can't get accreditation and review at the same time, right? Because there are clearly issues that need to be addressed. review, formulate a proposal, implement the proposal, and one of the recommendations might be accreditation, right? So I think is that we start with the review. I would say to this, it's going to be very interesting. Like, will the review process, will the reviewer have access to some of these documents that we discussed today? Because I don't feel it's like the reviewer can do a full, adequate review without seeing documentation. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
I strongly suspect that the NES reviewers had access to all the internal NES documents, but that we can certainly find out the answer to that.
I agree 100% with Johnny's talking about, because before anyone can go in and make any kind of recommendations or accreditations at all, they have to have a foundation of if a consultant comes in and actually says, okay, this is what you're going to need to be accredited. You know, that's the kind of consultant you want. You want someone who's going to be able to go in and just say, this is it according to what we've seen with other cities of this comparable size, that if we go in, you know, and someone that has done this not only in Nashville, but probably in other cities as well, you want to get someone that is trained and know exactly what they're doing, not someone that does not have the experience of something of a city that's comparable to Nashville, such as Charlotte, North Carolina, other cities that may be doing it, because and that way that consultant would have a history. If they were to do it again in 4 more years, they can see, okay, this is what, you know, what needs to be done. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know when I was managing one of the TV stations, before I had to file my papers with the FCC, we had a consultant at the network at NBC. We had a consultant that actually, they sent them out, and they would look at everything, our documents, public files, and everything, and they look at the history of things, and if there was things that we needed to correct it before we went before the FCC, then we had to do it, you know, because if we didn't, we would get fined. So I think that's something that can work in the same thing, you know, making sure you have someone come in, get them accredited, let them see what needs to be done. So I agree exactly what Johnny's talking about.
May I ask, Chair, then, I would just like to make sure, you know, as our commissioner expert here, then that Mr. Vanderpool get with staff to just make sure that we are making that ask explicit. And I think I understand it a little bit better of a 2-step process, but I think it's sort of predicated on the presumption that OEM should be accredited, and thus that prompting question. So I think I don't want this to appear, okay, we've done all this stuff and reviewed all this stuff, and then now our recommendation is get a consultant to tell us the same things. I think respectfully, like the prompt somewhat, or the predicate is the accreditation. And so I would just ask maybe that we be more specific in our language, or the type of consultant, or, you know, this field, what's appropriate ask, or that is just more specific, I guess, is my ask, Chair.
We certainly can make it more clear there. I mean, the notion I have when I talk about consultants is I have no idea. I suspect most of us, except for Johnny, don't. Sort of like, well, what's the appropriate organizational structure for an OEM? I mean, what are the qualifications of whoever's ahead of it, and what are what are the departments you need in there and the tools? But that's something that there's somebody who knows the answer to that and has got a good thing. We need to.
And Mr. Chair, I think we'll get some of that information and some of the benchmarking that Dr. Apquitz and her staff. We'll probably be able to see some of that, right? You'll just be able to. Themes will materialize. Themes have materialized through this review, right? So I think some of these things will just, once we get a little bit more information, we'll be able to cherry pick out exactly what we need. And I agree, is that the accreditation recommendation I feel like is a long-term vision. Does that make sense, right? You start with a review, you have a consultant come in, you let them work their magic, provide you with a report, right? And I guarantee you, most likely, any consultant will probably push for an accreditation for a city of this large, this size. The state of Tennessee is accredited, and I know for a fact that Williamson County is EMAP accredited. Williamson County is EMAP accredited. So if Williamson County can be EMAP accredited, I know Nashville, Davidson County can step up and take the next step. All right, thank you.
Chair, if I could really quickly, I know we are at time. I just wanted to hit on two things really quickly with 5 and 6. They're super short. With 5, with the community partners, I think that was, thank you for acknowledging that, because our community partners did step up and they played a vital role in filling in the gaps that government just cannot fill. And then for number 6, I just have one recommendation of utilizing all measures that we have at our disposal. For example, means was one that came up. And then lastly, after all of this robust conversation, a recommendation for an order that we can continue to discuss later. But I think that for our order, it would be appropriate to start with adding the historic nature of the storm, and then going to current number 2, which is Metro agencies, current number 4, OEM, current number 1, Metro employees, current number 3, NES, current number 6, which was Metro's daily press conferences, and then ending with our current number 5, which are our community partners. So I just wanted to put that out there as a thought.
Okay, I had made a note on mine. I think as I look at it, this community partners needs to be expanded a little bit, which I certainly can do. And the stuff on the mayor's press conference, what I'm envisioning is there maybe is a whole bullet point under here about the subject of communications, the public, and the issue of communications with, non-English language speakers and the like is a piece of that whole question. Just go back for 1 second on this subject of the recommendations around OEM. Because we originally said we weren't going to make recommendations, I think, as I said earlier, I kind of left that playbook behind a little bit because it seemed to me sort of so obvious that this OEM stuff needed to be done that we owed it to the mayor to tell him now, like, you need to get on with this and not wait for November or something when we come out with a report. So I've actually been thinking about just pulling that out as a separate section at the outset, which is to say there is a recommendation and here's what it is and here's what the basis is for it. And I think a lot of the issues that are notes I've written from your comments kind of naturally go into that process. Let's talk. We are past our time, but where do we want to go from here? I will take this back and work on another draft of it. Do you want to try to come back together again? Do you want to look at the drafts in the comfort of your home and get back with notions? What do you have a sense we need to do here?
I think, Chair, if you could take a stab at the draft based on and Kendra, if y'all could take a stab at the draft based on the recommendations and then possibly send that to us for review so that we have enough time, and then our next meeting we can maybe discuss again.
Okay, I think we do not have more meetings planned before this. Is that correct, Kendra? We do not have, I don't think, any more meetings planned prior to the release of an interim report.
I don't believe we do, but let me double check. We can always plan one, but you probably do not already have one on your calendar.
Yeah, I don't think we do. It's not my calendar. And we can, we certainly can do that if you want. Well, let me get a draft out. We'll get it circulated around, and let's see if people feel that there's a need for another meeting, if that works for you all.
Oh, yeah. I have one request. I know there were a lot of questions asked today, and so I'm happy to facilitate getting those to specific departments. But I also think this is a really opportune time if you all want to send me any outstanding or new questions that you have for our departments. It's probably been close to 3 or 4 months since we went through that initial process. I think that would be helpful for me to try to get you all answers to questions. Again, I have a lot of notes today, and I'll go on ahead and take action on those, but I think it's a good time to do another sort of request for written questions to me. So we're making sure we're getting you the information you need.
And Chair, if I may, I think by way of the interim report and some of the background and context, in addition to sort of the, the number of hearings, but sort of, stating like the work of staff, the summaries that have been prepared, the other internal interviews. I think for interim reporting purposes, really clearly itemizing that, right, beyond just what was public facing, but is publicly accessible. And then perhaps to Ms. Abkowitz's point, what are sort of the pending asks or things that are in progress, right? Like, so the benchmarking of other OEMs in peer cities. And then if we are going to make this interim recommendation relative to the consultant and accreditation, because, if we show this to the community in an interim status pending the final report, I think there's a bit of a kind of a progress report of kind of where we are, right? And so these are preliminary findings, but I think it's important as part of this product that we show, like, kind of here are still the work in progress, so to speak, and the asks that are kind of on the table and the recommendations that are on the table, and making this report inclusive of that would be a suggestion that I would make as we come to a close.
All right. I did put a fifth section, which was next steps in here. That's okay.
I did not turn my last page. I started taking notes on page 17,
Really?
and I, for some reason, did not get there, sir. I'm sorry. Thank you.
That's okay, but if anyone wanted to add, I won't keep things here now, but if you want to add anything to this in terms of the next steps.
Thank you, Chair. There it is in section 5. I'm so sorry. I just did not read section 5 when I did my initial review. Apologies.
Okay. Well, I think this has been this has been helpful. I think I have an assignment here now.
Good man.
And we will try to circle back around. I have jury duty next week, so I'll be in town. Hopefully, I won't get a 3-month case. But the last time I did it, I was actually a sitting governor, and I assumed they would not take me, but they did. And I ended up in a trial. And further out, I was hoping for some nice little shoplifting case or something, and instead got some major sexual abuse case. And it was just a very unpleasant experience. But anyway, good. This has been good. This has all been very helpful. And Kendra, you have a lot of work to do. Okay. And
Mr. Chair, thank you for putting this together. I sent you my notes. I'm sure most everybody sent their notes, and for you to be able to take all of this, digest it, and put it into this to where we had this conversation today. I think this has been one of the most important meetings we've had so far. Agreed. So thank you very much for being able to lead us on this, and this is going to be very important to make that next step. Thank you.
well, you're very kind. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Okay. Anyone object? We are adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.